Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode 580 for the 24th of November 2019. Richard Saunders here with you from quite a remarkable week in Sydney, Australia. We had some days in the past week where the bushfire smoke was thick. It's quite something. It's worse than I've ever seen it. I went downtown. I could not properly make out one end of the harbour from the other. For those of you who know Sydney, I was at Circular Quay looking north towards Luna Park and that side of the harbour. Couldn't quite see it properly. Stinging eyes, bad taste in the mouth. It's not good. And of course, Sydney is not the only place to be suffering bushfire smoke at the moment. Here other cities are similarly affected. But it's not just the smoky conditions people in Sydney and other places have to put up with. Of course, many people sadly have lost their homes and there's been widespread property damage. Many poor animals, too, have perished in the last few weeks due to these fires. And I find it amazing. The other day I was channel surfing on AM radio here and I happened across one of the more conservative AM radio stations. People ringing in, normally older people, I will say. This is the OK Boomer meme going around. Absolutely vehement in their condemnation of any suggestion of global warming or climate change. There's a generation, or no, that's very unfair. There's some people within a generation, it seems, that are absolutely vehemently convinced that global warming is a conspiracy or a hoax. And this is the classic case of cherry picking. A lot of these conservative radio hosts will find bits of data over the years that support their point of view, or they'll dig out some expert that supports them. I can't remember. I think it's one of those classic sayings, no matter how crazy the idea, you will always find a PhD who supports it. But let's turn to what's coming up on this week's episode of The Skeptic Zone. We're going to kick off with Dick Smith, the one and only, the patron of Australian Skeptics, one of the early founders of Australian Skeptics, Dick Smith. Now, a couple of years ago, Eran Segev and I from the Australian Skeptics visited Dick to interview him for a series of video interviews we are doing. Last week you would have heard Ian Bryce giving you tales and stories of the early days of Australian Skeptics. This week, Dick Smith talks about the time he flew James Randi to Australia in 1980 to take place in a very large-scale water divining test. Dick talks about that and other interesting adventures along the way. Following that, it's our good friends at the Good Thinking Society doing good work again, this time taking on ear candles. That modality that sort of sums up the very idea of quackery. Good Thinking in the UK have had some success in taking on ear candles. Find out more soon. Then we bring you the news of author Bailey Harris. Now, I spoke to Bailey Harris some weeks ago on the Skeptic Zone. I met her in Dragon Con in Atlanta in the USA. She wrote the Stardust series of books. Well, earlier this year, Bailey visited the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. This is the giant replica of Noah's Ark. And just recently, a video has been published about her visit to the Ark Encounter. I'm going to play you a few highlights, just to whet your appetite. Then to round off the show, The Hole in the Pole, Part 3. Tim Mendham, the executive officer for Australian Skeptics and the editor of The Skeptic magazine, not to be confused with any other magazine around the world that happens to be called The Skeptic. This is the one from Australian Skeptics. Tim wraps up his series about people trying to find hidden underground worlds. The Hole in the Pole, Part 3. Stay tuned at the end of the show. Do you stay tuned when you're listening to a podcast? Is that how it works? That used to be in the old days. They'd say, stay tuned to this radio station for further information, or stay tuned to this TV station. After the commercials, we will do this. I don't think you actually do stay tuned to a podcast. Keep playing the podcast towards the end of the show for more announcements from me, more information. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have some nice corn on the cob with mixed vegetables. Yummy and healthy. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. As part of the ongoing project to record the history of Australian skeptics, Aran Segev and I visited the home of Dick Smith. Dick Smith is one of the original patrons of the Australian skeptics, an adventurer, an explorer. Dick Smith was one of the first people to fly a helicopter solo around the world. He even flew a helicopter to the North Pole and a hot air balloon from Australia to New Zealand. Dick Smith, of course, is the founder of Dick Smith Electronics, a famous brand in Australia for many years. Dick played a vital role in the formation of Australian skeptics by flying James Randi to Australia way back in 1980.
Yes, it was my idea to bring James Randi to Australia. I'd read quite a lot about him in the Skeptical Inquirer, the American magazine. And I thought, gee, I'd love to bring him out here and we'll make a documentary. I'd just started making documentary films. And so the idea was to set out a challenge. And actually what happened was beyond my wildest dreams when he ended up on the Don Lane show.
Yeah, well, was the documentary, which later became called James Randi in Australia, this is the water divining test. And if memory serves, that was conducted up at Ryde?
Yes. In those days, I'd just started Dick Smith Electronics, was doing well, and we had a new warehouse at Ryde, and there was a block of land nearby, and this was the days before emails or anything like that, but I contacted James Randi by telex, and then I talked to him on the phone, and he said he sent me an example of a test he'd done. I think it was in Europe, and he said, Dick, if you're prepared to set up a grid of pipes and you have some land, he said, I'm very happy to come out here. He came for nothing. We just covered his airfares, and he stayed with Pip and I in our house here. And the fascinating thing was that I was using an ex-ABC television producer, Bob Connolly, to make documentary films on following the explorers. Now, Bob was a bit of a skeptic, so he said, fantastic, we'll make a film. I contacted Ted Thomas at Channel 7. He was the managing director, and he said, oh yeah, I'll buy the film from you. And so it was agreed they'd buy the film, and so we made this documentary on the water divining, which was a masterpiece in the end. We didn't realise how important it would be for the skeptical movement.
Levitators, spoon benders, water diviners, beware. James Randi, psychic investigator, is among you.
I'm not here to demean anybody. I'm not here to put anybody down, so to speak. I'm here to investigate. I can anticipate from my past experience, 35 years of it in this business, that it will probably be essentially the same story that it's been every place else in the world. People who innocently deceive themselves, and that small residual of people who go out of their way to actually defraud the rest of their fellow citizens.
Now, you've got $10,000, and there are two Australian businessmen who've each got $10,000. That's $30,000 for anyone who can successfully demonstrate the paranormal.
That's right.
How confident are you of keeping your money?
Well, let me see now. I'll show you the check. I've carried this check around now. This one has only been carried since June 25th, 1980. I have to renew it every now and then. I don't know about your banks, but every 6 months a check like this goes dead. You see, it's no longer valid. For 15 years, this is the 15th year, I've carried a check around like this in this tired little old wallet. That check for $10,000, I've never had to give up 5 cents of it so far. That doesn't mean that I won't. It doesn't mean that I'm not willing. I can lose $10,000, but I would gladly surrender that $10,000 if I were given evidence of one paranormal ability of any kind, because it would open my universe much larger than it is. It's a wonderful universe I live in. I enjoy life from day to day. I have my ups and downs like everyone else, but I think it is a wonderful world that we live in. I don't need miracles of a semi-religious nature, as they put it, in order to make my world any better. But to be offered something like that, to know that a person could float in the air, could find concealed water underground, could bend a spoon by merely thinking about it, that would make my universe 100 times bigger than it is, and all the more marvelous. It would be worth $10,000.
I remember saying to Randy, look, we can't go ahead with this. We're going to destroy these people, because they'd signed a document saying they'd have no excuses. And Randy said, Dick, have no fear. It will have no effect on their beliefs.
Confident in it.
What do you reckon they'll say, if they fail?
The rationalizations, Dick, you'll be amazed what they come up with as rationalizations. They'll invoke astrological signs, unfortunate aspects of the moon, all kinds of things. And also they'll say negative vibrations for
but wait a second, how can they do that if they're going to sign with us, if they're going to sign and say that they're very happy and they've checked a bit of pipe?
Doesn't make much difference. They'll find a rationalization. Now, I've been 35 years in this business, and you'd think that I'd be able to come up with all the rationalizations. I'm surprised.
Yeah.
The Dowsers particularly are very adept at this. Now, to you and me, to reasonable, rational, logical people, they have failed, and there doesn't seem to be any such power. But to them, they're not acting logically.
So what frustrates me is, what's the use of doing this if we're not going to...
It's true. The only thing you can do, and the only person you're going to convince of it, is, I think, particularly the younger generation, who are on the verge. They say, I wonder, does such a thing really happen or not? The old-timers who have believed in this all of their life, they're not going to change.
No.
And so sure enough, at the end, when it's found they all failed, they all had a reason. And so the human power to self-delude is unlimited. I learnt that at the time because I didn't want to take away people's beliefs, even if they were wrong. I mean, people have the right to be deluded. But in this particular case, it had no effect on their beliefs. But all the people watching, or most of the people watching, it had a great effect on. When we did the documentary, we also had Philip Adams lying on a desk in the Dick Smith Electronics office, and Randy was performing psychic surgery on him. That was part of the film, so we just didn't cover divining. There was quite a lot, and also Randy, I remember he had this pencil rolling up and down the desk, and we couldn't work it out. We were looking underneath it, and we finally worked out he was just blowing it with his mouth. But he is a master magician without any doubt, and he had the ability to get the audience on side. And from that point on, without doubt, his trip to Australia helped him, and he was appearing on the Johnny Carson show in the United States, and he was becoming more and more famous in the US. Of course, he had a major falling out with the skeptical movement because Uri Geller took him on, and Uri Geller was also suing the whole skeptics movement, and they didn't stand behind Randy. And so in the end, Randy went on his own for quite a long time. Now they're all back best mates again, which is great. Another important story is that when we were doing the tests for the Randy documentary, we found all of the diviners clustered around talking to each other. And so I walked over and I was listening to them. And they were saying to each other, this is not going to be fair. We're all going to get this money, the $50,000. So they'd agreed to share it. They'd all decided it would be only fair to share it. They were so convinced that the $50,000 which lay down was there. And then another interesting thing which happened, I'm not sure if it stayed in the film, it might have, that we had Australia's best diviners there. And we also had about 10 of Australia's best gold diviners. So we'd borrowed an ingot of gold, which came from the mint, and we had security guards and everything. But one of the diviners dropped his little bit of gold. See, most of the diviners hold a bit of gold in their hand or a little bit of water to get the reading. So he had his bit of gold, but he dropped it. So in the end, we had Australia's best diviners all trying to find it. They never found it again. It disappeared. A little bit of gold into the bushes or somewhere. So to me, it really taught me that water divining documentary. That was the start of realising that we all self-delude in some way, and we should all try and look for some evidence before we jump in and believe something. Now, let me tell you another story when Randy was here. This is a fascinating one. He was in my office and we'd done the tests outside with the diviners, and that all failed. And there was a reporter interviewing Randy, and the reporter was from the country, and he said, mate, I believe in water divining. My dad's used it, my family's used it, it's 100%. Nothing you will tell me will show me that it doesn't work. And so Randy grabbed, he said, get a couple of coat hangers. And so we bent 2 coat hangers so they were just in an L shape. And he said, Dick, can you go down to the warehouse and get a big speaker magnet? So he got the big speaker magnet, and of course if you put the rods near the speaker magnet, they would pull over to the magnet. And he said, now what I'm going to do, to the reporter, to the journalist, he said, I'm going to put the speaker magnet in a box, which he did, and he set the box on the end of the table. And he said, now, he said to the reporter, I want you to try and go past the box and the magnet, but try and keep the rods from being pulled over by the magnetic force. So the reporter goes past it and the rods bend over, click against the box. He said, no, try it again. So he went the other way. Boom, they go over. And then he said, oh, that's strange because there's no magnet there. And he lifted the box by sleight of hand. He'd removed the magnet. And it was an absolute proof that when you think there's a magnet there, it's like walking up an escalator. You sort of tread differently. And in this particular case, it just showed me absolutely how if you think something's happening, the muscles in your hand will move and they'll do what you think should happen, even though there's nothing there to pull it. Another little story these things come back to me, of our dowsing test with James Randi. I said to one of them, I said, look, if you can find gold with 100% accuracy, why aren't you wealthy? Because they all came and they had no money. And he looked at me and he touched me on the shoulder and he said, Dick, we're all not interested in money like you are. Yes, it was so lovely. And so they weren't interested in money, but they were all planning what they were going to do when they got the $40,000 or $50,000 or whatever it ended up to be. We'd bought Randy out, I'd sent press releases out, the media were not interested. Basically had no real interest in the water divining tests at all. But then I got a phone call from the producer at Channel 9 in Melbourne for the Don Lane Show. Now, I'd appeared on the Don Lane Show from time to time, and I knew Don was a total believer in Uri Geller and Doris Stokes. He believed in everything. And they said, oh, Don would like Randy to come on. And I thought, well, that's a bit strange, but it'll be great publicity. We had no idea, of course, that when Randy went on, and the segment when Don lost his temper and threw the spoons off and walked off his own show, leaving our Mr. James Randi with national television right around the country stunned.
$1,000 to people to say people are fakes. You said Doris Stokes is a fake. You say Uri Geller is a fake. You came here and you're giving everybody a lot of lip service, and you haven't done anything except show us a lot of tricks that you learned out of your 2-bit act that you're not working in. You did so. You said he was a fake. You called him a two-bit magician. You said he was a fake, and you said he didn't. I'm not defending Uri Geller. What I am defending is you. You come over here with this big reputation. You give us a lot of lip service about all this stuff that you're going to prove. You go against a lady like Doris Stokes who never harmed anybody in her whole life, and you call her a charlatan and a fake.
You know a great deal about it.
Yes, I do. You said that she was a liar on the radio. You called her a liar. No. And that woman wouldn't lie to anybody. And I don't know whether she's right or wrong, but she wouldn't lie to anybody. We're going for a commercial break, and you can off. We'll be back with Diana Tracy.
And of course, from that instant on, Randy was famous. I'll give you an example that when Randy arrived back in Sydney to come up to my house here from the next morning, I went out to the Sydney Kingston Smith Airport to pick up Randy, and there were all these media people there, the television, and there were people with their notebooks and press cameras and everything. What's this about? They were there for Randy. And so it was amazing. He went from being completely unknown to becoming famous. And if you Google Don Lane Randi, you come up with that segment. It has been run and run and run. And what it did for the skeptical movement was fantastic because it gave us this incredible publicity. Well, there's a fascinating story about the cheque and Pip's home account. What had happened, this New Zealand millionaire, he had this protege who could water divine beautifully and divine anything. And he contacted me and said, can I send this person to Australia to win the $100,000 by then? It was $100,000 that I came up with. And so on the morning, I had to go up to Gosford because it was a Gosford radio station that was going to run the test. And I remember saying to Pip, quick, where's the checkbook? And so she found her checkbook, which was her home account, and she said, oh, it's only got $250 in it. So I wrote out the $100,000 cheque, went up to Gosford, and I said to the radio station manager, because he was a total believer in water divining, you are if you live in Gosford, there's water everywhere, and I handed him the cheque and I said, you hand that cheque. You decide who's the winner and you hand the cheque over $100,000. And he's shaking. He says, oh, I've never held so much money in my life before. And I thought, if he only knew, of course, I would have come up with the money. But what happened, this guy had arrived from New Zealand. He was demonstrating. He had a brass door knocker and he kept putting it down on the ground and he'd walk around and the rods would bend. It was incredibly effective. And I said, look, we were going to have 10 cardboard shoeboxes. And I said, what so we use your door knocker in the cardboard box? And he couldn't believe it. How could I be that fair? I was going to lose my money. And so we put the door knocker in the cardboard box. First of all, we get him to check without the door knocker, is there any effect? He got no effect with the 10 cardboard boxes. One stage he saw my briefcase. He said, can I move that further away? He was convinced there was something in the briefcase because he thought, how can this Dick Smith, he's not going to lose his $100,000. There must be something going to stop me from winning. So we moved the briefcase. Then I said, now we're going to put the brass knocker in one of the boxes and you show us you get the reading. He said, it's not necessary. And I said, yes, it is. It's part of the protocol set by James Randi. So we then put the brass knocker in box number 2 and he goes along in box number 2. He's pulling the rods. It's just unbelievable, the pulling power when you know it's there. So I said, now what we'll do, and we had 10 little discs in a bag, and I said, I'll go away, and I said, you'll go away. They'll then randomly they'll take a disc out between 1 and 10 and then put the brass door knocker in one of the 10 cardboard shoeboxes. Then that person will go away and then you'll come along and you'll divine which one it's in. Well, of course, what happened, I think he magically got less than 1 in 10. I find this quite often happens. And so, unfortunately, he failed. Now, I must tell you another story. I'm here in the house here and there's a knock on the door, and this gentleman about 75 years of age had come all the way from Melbourne to win the $100,000, and he knocked on the door and he'd written to me, and I said, no, look, I don't want to spend any more time. I don't want to waste your time. So he'd come over with his wife, and he, as I opened the door here, he threw a $1 note down on the ground, and he said, look at this, and he's got his divining rods out, and the $1 note is pulling the divining rods. And I said, okay, so we went and got the 10 cardboard boxes, and he didn't even pass the first test because, first of all, we did the test, there was no reading when there was nothing in it. So then I said, now you've got to put the $1 in one of the boxes and show that it works when the lid's on the box. So he put the $1 in box number 3, sat it down, then goes up and down and divines it as box number 4. And his wife said, darling, remember what box you put it in. She kept repeating this. And eventually, so I said, it's definitely box number 4. I said, yes, it's pulling like that. So we lift the lid. It's not there because it was in box number 3. And what it showed is, to me, how genuine. I've never yet met a fraudulent person when it comes to claiming the $100,000, or Randy now has, I think, $1 million. I've never met a fraudulent person when it comes to the divining tests. Yes, with some other contests I have, but the divining tests, they've been genuinely believers in their ability, which they've never been able to show to any person who uses a bit of rational thinking. It simply doesn't work. It's idiomotor reaction. If you think it's there, it's there. I must tell you another story. In England, there is the English Dowser Society, and I became a member. They didn't know I was a skeptic. And one day they sent me their magazine, and they said, we're having a contest. Here is a map, and there's a gold mine on one bit of the map. Please douse it with your pendulum and mark it where it is, and the person closest to the gold will win an award from the English Dowsing Society. I thought, fantastic. I got in touch with Randy. I said, let's watch this. And so we waited and waited and waited. We put in a couple of entrants ourselves. And then they came back and they brought out their magazine. They said, we've cancelled the contest because they said something weird has happened and everything's been corrupted, and we just got random marks all across the map of where the gold was. So it had no effect on their belief that maybe their belief is wrong, and you can't dowse a map. I mean, have you ever heard anything so ridiculous? You get a pendulum on a map to design where a gold mine is? By the way, I think the skepticism movement is important because from time to time, and a good example would be the immunisation movement, we ended up with a situation, and I got back involved again, where there was a quite extraordinary organisation called the Australian Vaccination Network. Now, in fact, they were anti-vaccination. They'd completely deluded themselves into believing the things you hear, that vaccination causes autism and all of these claims that have been shown to have no evidence. But they were quite influential. And so I got involved again, being sort of a public figure, and I was able to get out there and say, look, please vaccinate your children. They're going to die. And it taught me again that we have to be very careful in society because, especially with modern communications, the internet and so forth, that you can send out something, either a hoax, in the case of that Randy Opera House stunt, or genuinely deluded people. And the genuinely deluded people are in many ways the most dangerous to society because they can get large followings because they're so genuine. And my attitude on this, by the way, is that we trust doctors to do heart transplants. Well, I reckon I'm going to trust them to tell me whether a vaccination is safe or not. The other thing we've got to be communicating is that everything has risk. This tends to be forgotten. And yes, you go into an operation, you have a full anaesthetic, and there's a 1 in 50,000, some people claim 1 in $500,000, you will die from the anaesthetic. But that doesn't mean to say you don't get operated on for a heart problem or a lung problem, cancer, all of those things. People have got to understand that there's risk with everything, but it's the balance. What's the chance of you dying from this injection compared to what's the chance of you having a good life because you've had the injection, and you balance the two?
You can see more of that interview with Dick Smith by following the link on this week's show notes and other interviews about the history of Australian skeptics.
Hi folks, Maynard here, and I'll be conducting very special interviews with Richard Saunders and other people at SkepticCon in Melbourne. I said Melbourne. Yes, Melbourne, home of cranky baristas and people who talk a lot, and there will be a lot of talking going on at SkepticCon. In fact, imagine going and studying at some tertiary institution for many, many years, only to find yourself in Melbourne being interviewed by me. Hardly the academic reward you would like, but that will be happening in December as Richard Saunders and myself just completely blitz the record for how many interviews we can do in a 24-hour period, or even a 48-hour period, and that's quite a lot. And this time we're going to go for quite a lot more. Yes, that's SkepticCon. Be there in December in Melbourne. I'm standing here with a bad haircut and an even worse suit.
On the Skeptic Zone podcast over many years, every now and then we have tackled the issue, looked at the issue, examined the issue of one of the most bizarre forms of quackery I have ever seen. And the first time I saw this particular piece of woo, I had to look twice because I could not believe what I was seeing. Ear candling. For those of you who may not know, this is where you get a lit candle, or I should say it's more like a tube of wax in the shape of a candle. You stick one end in your ear while lying down on your side, and the other end is lit. The thinking behind it, if thinking is the right term, is that the flame will cause a vacuum up the tube of the ear candle, the hollow inside. This vacuum will draw out wax from your ear. Now, not only is this scientifically implausible, in fact, for the vacuum to do that would probably perforate your eardrum anyway, it's physically not possible. It doesn't work. The little flame at the end of the candle does not create such a vacuum. But then we get all the other New Age garbage, which is normally made with similar things. It will give you peace of mind. It will balance your energies. It will draw out other toxins, and so on. It's a spiritual thing to do, maybe. The reality is, of course, that these things are dangerous, and they have no known medical benefits. The danger comes in sticking a candle in your ear, which can result in hot wax dripping down into the ear canal. So it's good to see that once again, our good friends at the Good Thinking Society have stepped up to the plate, fronted up to bat at the crease for science and reason. And here's a press release from the Good Thinking Society in the UK, of course dated November the 19th, 2019. BBC upholds our complaints against Claudia Tries... ear candling. This post is by Laura Thomason. The BBC's Executive Complaint Unit has upheld our complaint against, quote, Claudia tries ... ear candling, end quote, a short video which appeared on the Glasgow-based digital platform The Social. We are concerned that the video gave the misleading impression that ear candling is both effective and safe. The presenter, Claudia Scott, said ear candles are known for drawing out impurities, clearing pressure, and relieving sinuses. She also said she would recommend this as an alternative to ear syringing for anyone who was worried about having their ears syringed. Now, as an aside, I will say that many years ago, I was suffering from ear problems. After swimming, the water wouldn't all drain out from my ears. It was very annoying. Finally, I went to the doctor for an examination, and lo and behold, I had some blockage in there, some wax. A quick syringe, and my problems were fixed. It was remarkable. We read on. The BBC ECU concluded, there is no evidence that ear candling is an effective treatment for any condition, and the website version of the item, though not its Facebook iteration, was accompanied by text stating the NHS view was that the practice was not supported by evidence and that sinus/ear problems should be referred to a doctor or pharmacist. However, this was entirely offset by comments from the presenter which recommended the treatment and endorsed claims for its effects. The head of Editorial Standards Scotland has discussed with the team the importance of accuracy in items which feature or make reference to practices which might be harmful. We would suggest that any subject relating to health or medicine would require careful consideration and is unlikely to be suitable for a light-hearted, quote, lifestyle, end quote, feature. Presenting fringe ideas and treatments in this way gives the audience a wholly misleading impression that can lead them to make unwise and even dangerous health decisions. So, once again, 3 cheers for the Good Thinking Society in the UK. And, well, as I said in a recent Twitter post, you can follow the Skeptic Zone on Twitter, at Skeptic Zone, to Aldi supermarkets here in Australia who were selling ear candles, although they ended up in the bargain cabinet, marked down. I said words to the effect that the ear candles don't belong in the bargain section, they belong in the bin. A link to this story from the Good Thinking Society in this week's show notes.
Sweet cappuccino. Soy latte.
Hey, Richard.
Oh, hi, Trish. Hi. Would you like a coffee?
Yeah, thanks. What are you working on?
I'm trying to come up with a new promo to play on the Skeptic Zone.
Who's it for?
The Good Thinking Society in the UK. You know, the...
Oh, yeah, I know them. The guys who recently chased the homeopaths out of the UK public health system.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they campaigned and lobbied government for a while, and now you cannot get homeopathy on the NHS. So they can now spend public money on healthcare that works.
Oh, right. Look, I'll mention that in the promo. Now, their website is goodthinkingsociety.org.
And that website is a good resource for learning more about quackery.
Ah, thanks, Trish. That gives me something good to think about. You may remember I interviewed a very young author I met at DragonCon by the name of Bailey Harris. Now, this was on show number 571 on the 22nd of September this year. Bailey is an author, speaker, and advocate for free thought and human rights. Now, she wrote a series of books called Stardust about the history of, well, everything. The universe, life on Earth, all that sort of thing, directed at children. So in the past week, I got word from Bailey that a video has been made of her adventure visiting Ark Encounter in Kentucky in the United States. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Ark Encounter is a giant replica of, yes, Noah's Ark. And you can wander through Noah's Ark and look at all the animals in the pens, or replica animals in replica pens, learn all about the true history of the universe, as revealed in the pages of the Old Testament. But maybe more importantly for us, you can see Bailey's visit to the Ark Encounter via a YouTube video. Now, the information accompanying says, what better way to spend Easter weekend than to take a tour of the Ark Encounter and expose the anti-science that it bleeds from every pore. This is just what author and secular activist Bailey Harris partnered with the Secular Student Alliance to do earlier this year. Now, I think this is something the Skeptic Zone audience will find very interesting, amusing, a little bit frightening. The video is called Secular Tour of the Ark Encounter, Atheist Bailey Harris versus Fundamentalist Ken Ham. And I'll certainly link to that video on this week's show notes so you can check it out for yourself. But I thought I'd play a few moments of highlights.
Hello everyone, this is Bailey Harris and I'm a secular activist and the author of the Stardust book series. Thank you to Secular Student Alliance for partnering with me to do a secular tour of the Ark Encounter. There is no better way to spend Easter weekend than taking a trip to the great state of Kentucky to see anti-science at its best. Tickets are expensive, $51 for adults and $27 for children. We hated giving them our money, but we hope that this helps many of you experience the Ark without having to go yourself. The Ark Encounter opened in 2016 in Kentucky. It is 510 feet long and over 50 feet high. The Ark Encounter is operated by Answers in Genesis, the anti-science young earth creationist group. They spent over $100 million to build the Ark and they received significant tax incentives from the city, county, and state. Where's the church-state separation? The fairy tale of Noah's Ark is found in the Old Testament. It tells the story of a 500-year-old man named Noah and his family who lived on Earth 4,300 years ago, supposedly only a couple of thousand years after Earth formed. Their God was upset because the people living on Earth had become so wicked. God said in Genesis 6, "I will destroy from the earth the people I have created, and with them the animals, birds, and creeping things." Noah was the most righteous person living on earth, so he made a deal with God that he and his family wouldn't be murdered in this mass genocide. Oh man, I love this snake. This is the truest statement in this place. If I can convince you that the flood was not real, then I can convince you that heaven and hell are not real. I'm making this my mantra. The experience of visiting the Ark Encounter was very surreal to me. The size and magnificence is actually rather awe-inspiring, but this magnificence makes it even more dangerous for children. This attraction is anti-science at every corner, and I left with an even stronger understanding of why we need to all fight for science, education, and truth. I hope that you can all join me in continuing this fight.
So there you go. Check out the video for yourself and see what Bailey Harris gets up to in the replica of Noah's Ark.
Dr. Harriet Hall, MD, known to thousands as the Skepdoc, a retired family physician and former Air Force flight surgeon. She writes about medicine, so-called complementary and alternative medicine, science, quackery, and critical thinking. Harriet now has a free course, a series of 10 video lectures on science-based medicine and alternative medicine. The videos and an accompanying course guide can be found by following the link at skepdoc.info or by visiting web.randy.org/educational-modules.html. Topics covered in the series are science-based medicine versus evidence-based medicine, what is CAM, chiropractic, acupuncture, homeopathy, naturopathy and herbal medicine, energy medicine, miscellaneous alternatives, pitfalls in research, and science-based medicine in the media and politics. Harriet covers each topic in a matter-of-fact, no-nonsense way that's sure to educate and entertain. Skepdoc.info.
Hi, my name's Tim Mendham. I'm Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics and Editor of The Skeptic magazine. Today we're looking once again at the hole in the pole. This is the story of the supposed holes into the underground under the earth, where who knows lives and dwells. Previously, we looked at the history of some of these holes, including the efforts by the Nazis to find one and populate it, and also the issue of photos that have supposedly shown the holes in the poles. They haven't, and we explain why. But in this third part, we will look at the people who have tried to go there and the adventures that they've had in their efforts, which have not generally been very successful. So, this is The Hole in the Pole from The Skeptic magazine, March 2018, Volume 38, Number 1. We call this section the Clough Links. And no discussion of holers, which are the people who are believers in conspiracies of holes in the poles, would be complete without the salutary lessons of a leading proponent of the Hollow Earth, Rodney Clough, author of World Top Secret, Our Earth is Hollow. Cliff knows the holes well. He says, my latest best estimate of the size of the polar openings are that they are 840 miles in diameter where they start to dip into the Earth, and that the neck of the polar openings are 40 miles in diameter. The North Polar Opening is located near Northland, Russia at 84.84 north latitude, 129 east longitude. The South Polar Opening is on the exact opposite of the globe at 84.84 south latitude, 51 west longitude. Now, that's pretty precise, and we hope it comes true. Will Stort of the UK Telegraph wrote a long article on the history of hollow earthers in 2014, and Clough's story featured pretty prominently. It turned out that Clough was a long-time fanatic of the Hollow Earth, so much so that in the 1980s he moved his family from New Mexico to Alaska so they could be nearer the hole and perhaps find it, much to his wife's chagrin. In Alaska, Storr relates, Clough met a small group of people who had travelled to the icy state with the same idea. Soon they were ready to embark upon their mission. We started on the road up to Point Barrow, Clough said. We saw a sign at one point saying, "This is a private road, don't go any further." So we didn't go any further. They turned back. Storr asked how long they had driven before they reached the sign and aborted the mission. "Oh, about an hour," Clough said. Soon afterwards, the Clough family moved back south. Of course, Clough didn't stop there. He was so confident in the theory that he organised a tourist voyage to the Hollow Earth with a plan to set off from Russia on an icebreaker in June 2007 to find the hole in the pole. Now, you can look up this on voyagehollowearth.com. The vessel was the Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker Yamal, a modern ship capable of carrying 108 passengers with all mod cons. As the promotion for the trip said, quote, "The vessel accommodates passengers in 50 first-class outside cabins and suites, all with private facilities and large windows, as well as a desk, television and other comforts. Public areas include a large dining room, accommodating all passengers in one sitting, library, lounge, theatre-style auditorium, volleyball court and gymnasium, heated indoor swimming pool and sauna. Views are excellent from the navigation bridge, where we are almost always welcome, and there are large open decks on several levels. The Yamal also has a good polar library and a small infirmary. European master chefs present an excellent and varied international menu with fine provisions from around the world. A combination of European and experienced Russian staff will serve you aboard. The popular bar is stocked with your favourite spirits, wines and champagnes, so it sounds like a good trip. Rooms were priced from US $18,950 to $20,950 per person, depending on the room type. The itinerary was to start with some sightseeing around Moscow and then a flight to Murmansk to join the Yamal. After several days of sailing to the North Pole, where they would spend the day and even call home to talk to family and friends, on days 9 to 11 they would start the search for the North Polar opening. Once found, and this is where it starts to get interesting, they would travel up the Hidekal River to the city of Jihu, take a monorail trip to the city of Eden, and visit the palace of the king of the inner world. If they were unable to find the polar opening, their fallback position would be to return via the New Siberian Islands to visit skeleton remains of exotic animals thought to originate from inner Earth. This time, Clough's success in being thwarted did not fail him. The expedition was cancelled following the death of his partner in the venture, explorer Steve Curry, just weeks before the planned departure. No further trips were planned by Clough until one of the various expedition members who had expressed interest to continue the quest to reach inner Earth came forward with an offer to be their new expedition leader. Dr. Brooks Agnew formed a new expedition company, put up a new expedition website, and began to gather donations for the new North Pole Inner Earth expedition, initially planned for August 2012, then postponed to July-August 2013. Unfortunately, Agnew resigned in September 2013, citing losses in his electric car company. Despite these continued setbacks, and like followers of many such theories, Clough's enthusiasm and single-mindedness for the Hollow Earth lingers. He is adamant that he is right, and can't understand what gets into those who can't see the light. "I don't know how the flat earthers can be so confused," he told Sun Online. "They are obviously wrong. The world is not flat, it's hollow. They reject all the evidence." And with those words hangs the story of the Holers. Dodgy evidence, hyperbolic and hyperactive imagination, conspiratorial and paranoid delusion, and a passion which cannot be crushed. Crackpots or not, they're a fascinating bunch, and will no doubt entertain us for decades to come, with or without a hole. That's Hole in the Pole from The Skeptic, March 2018, Volume 38, Number 1.
The Skeptic Magazine, the journal from Australian skeptics. Subscribe online to the world's second oldest skeptical magazine. Visit www.skeptics.com.au and click the publications link. You can also find there over 30 years of back issues free to download. The Skeptic, the magazine from Australian skeptics. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Now here's some good news regarding our friend Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, the science communicator of Australia. And this comes to us from the ABC, the national broadcaster, which Karl appears on every week on radio. Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki says he's not particularly smart despite winning UNESCO Prize. A story by Claudine Ryan and Susanna Lyons. It says in part, he might be one of Australia's most well-known and loved scientists, and now the winner of a United Nations Award for Science Communication, but Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki doesn't consider himself to be that brainy. Quote, "One thing that gives me a great advantage is that I'm not particularly smart. My IQ is only about 110, which is in there with two-thirds of the population between 115 and 85, end quote, Dr. Karl says, quote, "That means for me to be able to understand something, I've really got to go into it, but then I understand it," end quote. All that time delving into science has not only helped generations of Australians better understand the world around and inside them, it's seen Dr. Karl awarded the 2019 UNESCO Kalinga Prize for the popularization of science in Budapest this week. Dr. Karl is the first Australian to win the prize, which he received in recognition of his, quote, "long-standing commitment to fire up people's curiosity for science and to share his passion for the subject," end quote. Previous winners include Arthur C. Clarke, David Suzuki, and Sir David Attenborough. And this story goes on. It's quite lengthy, covering Dr. Karl's career. I'll link to that in the show notes, but a big shout out and a big congratulations to somebody I am thrilled to say is my friend, Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki. Well deserved.
G'day, this is Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, proud to be a skeptic, and you can find out more about me at drkarl.com and get lots of free stuff there as well.
Thank you, Dr. Karl, and I look forward to catching up with you soon, I hope. Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone financially at Patreon or PayPal at skepticzone.tv. I think I say it every week, but it needs to be said for two reasons. One, I do really sincerely thank those people who contribute, because without you, I would be not doing the Skeptic Zone. And two, it's to encourage other people who maybe have not yet contributed to the Skeptic Zone to consider doing so. They can only be something like $5 a month. A big shout out and congratulations to my friend and colleague Brian Dunning at the Skeptoid podcast, who just celebrated 700 episodes. I've got a bit of catching up to do. And finally, don't forget to check out maynard.com.au for Maynard's range of podcasts. And also, folks, if you need a DJ over the holiday period here in Australia and you're in the Sydney area, head for maynard.com.au and book Maynard for your next gig, party or corporate event. And finally, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing you Skeptic Zone fans at the Skepticon in Melbourne, coming up in only a very short few weeks away. Not only will Maynard and I be there from the Skeptic Zone, but many other reporters too, including Aran Segev, Mandy Lee Noble, Heidi Robinson, the Raw Skeptic, Trish Han from Trish and Chips, and Dr. Paulie. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Hello to the afterthoughts, the people who listen after the music. We're going to play the dice game again this week. For those of you new to this section of the show, every now and then I roll a die. There's one. And see if you can use your psychic or any other predicting powers you have. We always say psychic, but we don't mean psychic. To see if you can guess. Yes, guess what number comes up. I'm going to roll this 3 times. And this week, for something different, it's a D4. A D4. So, if you get all, where's my pen? There it is. If you get all 4 numbers correct, that gives you the odds are 4 times 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is, of course, 64. So, you have a 1 in 64 chance of getting all numbers. Here we go. First one, shaking the die now, and the first number that comes up is 4. Okay. Second one, coming up now. Next number is 2. 4, 2. Last number. Guess away, and 3. There we go. If you shouted out, wrote down, thought, before the dice was rolled of the numbers 4, 2, and 3, you've got odds there. You've beaten odds, or you've matched odds of 64 to 1. And what do you win? You win a chance to listen to the next episode of The Skeptic Zone.